Mpho Tutu is Anglicaans priester en dochter van oud-aartsbisschop Desmond Tutu. Een deel van het jaar woont ze in Nederland. Ze maakte zelf de Apartheid mee en ze weet wat het met mensen doet als je groepen uit elkaar trekt. Wat ziet zij in Nederland? En welke lessen van het Afrikaanse continent zijn hier toepasbaar? Hier gaat zij op in haar speech Love does not count on evil.
Love keeps no record of wrongs. What is that? Is that a promise? Is it a challenge? Is it one of those nice bumper sticker things that sounds really good until you stop to think about it? Love keeps no record of wrongs. It may be any of those things, but I'm willing to bet that it's not the way that any of us lives. When was the last time you heard this question? How many times do I have to tell you to clean up your room, pick up your socks, do the laundry, call me if you're going to be late? Evidently, we are repeat offenders, and evidently, someone is keeping record. And I'd like to guess that, given the questions, that someone is someone we love, someone who loves us. Mother, father, girlfriend, boyfriend, sister, brother, leave myself alone. The closer the relationship, the more rigorous the record keeping. That's the second time this week that I have told you to. Isn't it the third time I've asked you not to? So clearly, love is keeping a record somehow. And if love at the most intimate levels is keeping a record of wrongs, what happens when we get to levels that aren't intimate, at our institutions? You can't tell me that we're not keeping track of how many times boys get to do things that girls don't get to do. How many times women get opportunities that men don't get. Not many. And at the institutional level, what about at the national level, when racism is a reality in people's lives? And what about at the international or intergovernmental level, when rich countries use resources with great abandon and poor countries pay the price in environmental costs, in flooding and hurricanes and other damage? So does Christian love mean that we're not supposed to be keeping track of these things? And how do you square the Christian demand for justice with this Christian call not to keep records? In accounting, there is a term called reconciliation, and that means that you keep a record of your accounts, and you have to show that what you've spent out accords with the records that you have, so your receipts or your bonnages or whatever it is that they're called, that they show up on your account ledger. And when that happens, then the ledger is said to be reconciled and the account is cleared, and so there's no need to keep further records. in human relationships, it's the same kind of thing. That in order for us to have justice, in order for us to truly express the Christian love that doesn't keep records, we require reconciliation. And human reconciliation is like accounting reconciliation. And accounting reconciliation doesn't say nothing happened. It says this happened, this is how we account for it, and this is how we clear the ledger. And in human terms, in our relationships, reconciliation requires forgiveness. So reconciliation and forgiveness can be quite easy. My father and I recently wrote a book called The Book of Forgiving, and in it we describe the 4 steps of reconciliation, forgiveness and reconciliation. That first you must tell the story, then you must name the hurt, then you can offer or ask forgiveness, and then you receive or you form a reconciled community. So, for instance, if I say something mean to my daughter, I can see her face crumple even before the words are fully out of my mouth. And I am heart-struck and I say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And she can forgive me in that moment, and we can move on together. Sometimes forgiveness is easy, but mostly it's hard. I mean, who really wants to go through that process that can be quite searing? Who wants to retell the story that can be embarrassing or that can feel hurtful or shameful? Who wants to relive that experience? A couple of weeks ago, half the world watched while a woman sat in front of the US Senate to tell a story about sexual abuse that she had experienced at the hands of someone who was later to be confirmed to the US Supreme Court. And what Christine Blasey Ford said was, "I don't want to sit here and tell you this story. In fact, I'm terrified to sit before you." But love always seeks justice, and love must always speak the truth. And so she sat and she testified. She didn't achieve the reconciliation she hoped for, but she is on her own forgiveness journey. She could have stayed in the shadows and nursed her hurt, but she chose to come forward and tell her story. Forgiveness requires telling the story. It also then requires naming the hurt. In 2012, I came home to my house in Cape Town, and it was eerily silent. And in my oldest daughter's bedroom, our housekeeper, Angela, lay on the floor. Her head was in a pool of blood. She had been stabbed and strangled. And it was clear from the room that she had fought for her life, because she was dead. And the young man who was found guilty of her murder, Mpho, hurt so many people in so many different ways. I can only truly know and name my own hurt. I can't forget the shrieks of Angela's mother when I called her to tell her this news. I cannot forget the grieving wails of her aunts and sisters, and I can't forget the way that that just ripped a hole in my heart. The pain was visceral. I can't forget how heart-sore I felt seeing Angela's daughter so contained and dignified when she came to testify, and to see where her mother had died. Mpho stole so much. He stole one life and so many ways of life. He stole that fantasy that every mother has that she can keep her children safe. And when I saw my oldest daughter's anguish and her battle with trauma and mental illness afterwards, that he had snatched away that joyful child and in her place left an anxious and fearful girl. The road to forgiveness requires naming the hurts. And when we've named the hurts, only then are we really free to forgive. In the South Africa of my growing up, I grew up under Apartheid in South Africa, where every decision about life was based on the color of your skin, where you were born, where you grew up, where you went to school, where you worked, where you died. I think they even had a segregated heaven that people went to. Not sure about that. Every advantage was given to white South Africans, and every disadvantage suffered by black South Africans. Where white people could expect state-of-the-art medical care in pristine hospitals, black people queued for days in poorly serviced and poorly equipped hospitals. Where white people could expect to live and grow up in clean and safe neighborhoods, black people lived in the heart of unsafety. And of course, black South Africans, people of color, resisted that oppression. People of color and their allies resisted that oppression, and the government struck back with violence. So many were imprisoned and tortured and killed. And after the apartheid era, the new South African government impaneled a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where people came forward to tell the stories of their own suffering or that of their loved ones, of human rights abuses that they had experienced at the hands of the South African government. And where perpetrators came and spoke about the abuses that they had inflicted, the torture, the murder. And it wasn't expected of them. But often when those who were perpetrators faced those who were victims, the perpetrators had the grace to ask forgiveness. And it could not be required of them. But God is gracious and people are courageous. And many South Africans were willing to grant that forgiveness, knowing that forgiveness opens the door to reconciliation. And it's not a story that is over, that has a finished and clear, happy ending. The road to reconciliation is still a road that we are on. And in places we have worked out and resolved and come to a just settlement, and in other areas of South African life that is not yet so. But love requires justice, and justice requires reconciliation. The Apostle Paul, in his second letter to the Corinthians, says, we are ministers of reconciliation. We have been given this ministry of reconciliation. And what that means is that we do not have the luxury to give up on each other. We do not have the luxury to skip the record and move on. What is demanded of us is to go through the processes that are required to create a just humanity. When Jesus was resurrected, I can imagine that his disciples weren't all wholly excited about seeing him again. If you'll remember, they betrayed, ran away, denied him. And so, facing the resurrected Jesus, I'm sure some of them thought, hi, wasn't expecting to see you back. So good to see you, Jesus. But Jesus' response to them is a response not only of forgiveness, but of reconciliation, because what Jesus says to the disciples is, I no longer call you servants, I call you friends and brothers, because a servant doesn't know what the master is up to, but a brother knows. And that is the model of reconciliation that we are to live. We live in love, and love keeps no records, because love gives birth to justice. And when there is justice, no record is needed.